Hello, Australia. Welcome to episode 6 of the Layback Podcast. I'm Jackson Allen, and for those of you joining us for the first time, this is a podcast about Australian climbers and their stories. A quick update from me. I know I've been slow on the episode uptake lately. I apologize. In my defense, I have a full-time job and, a family, and I have to work that around the podcast, and I do like to get out and climb a bit myself as well. It's a privilege actually to be able to sit down with these climbers and ask them questions and hear their stories and capture it for the podcast. And each episode gets a lot of love and care, and it's a bit of a slow process. So I'll do my best to get as many out as I can, but there might be little lulls every now and again when kind of life happens. In this episode, I sit down in Natimuk with Olivia Page, freelance photographer, climber, bootstrapping adventurer, and an ambassador for Arc'teryx. Olivia has been shooting adventure, travel, and conservation photography for over a decade. We cover her stories from helicopter hunting in New Zealand to dirtbagging in the Arapiles, sailing around Asia, Federation Peak in Tasmania in the winter, Yosemite, and this all-female expedition to attempt a first mountain peak traverse and first mountain ascent in the remote north of Fiordland in New Zealand. Actually, Olivia is always doing crazy different things, and in the 4 months leading up to this interview, I'd be calling her, and every time I'd speak to her, she would be, or message her, she'd be doing something different, or working on some other project in this crazy life of hers. Olivia is really passionate about getting more women outside and into trad, and she's pushing many different avenues to make that happen. I'd recommend heading over to thelayback.com, where I've shared links to Olivia's website and the various projects that she's been a part of. And she's also provided some really great photos that I've overlaid on the video of this interview, which you can watch over on YouTube, when you'll find links to that YouTube video on thelayback.com. Anyway, enough from me. Strap in. Let's get into it. So let's start with climbing. How did you get into it?
Climbing, originally I didn't know what climbing was, and I think I was in high school and my friend Sandy mentioned climbing, and I was like, oh, you know what, I think that's something I'd like to get into, but I didn't really know what it was. I just liked the sound of it. And then he continued on to tell me that he used to do competition climbing in primary school. And was like, well, let's go after school one day and we'll just go to the climbing gym. And he had his license already, so we drove to the climbing gym, Nunawading, Hard Rock. And I think, we hired the shoes and the harnesses, and I did one climb and I was like, yeah, this is it. I just had this feeling that climbing, even though I didn't know what it was, I was like, yeah, I think that's going to be me. And then I did it. And then we climbed for the whole afternoon and then went to, I think, Anaconda, and went and bought shoes and harness that day. And
straight away.
Yeah, straight away I was like, I found my thing. So yeah.
Why do you think you were in a position where that just happened? Like what were the prerequisites, do you think, honestly, to you liking climbing from that first experience?
From that experience? I think I tried a few other things like surfing and snowboarding, and I did enjoy the outdoors. But there was just something about climbing where I think it combined everything, like mentally and physically, it combined those two things, and it felt safe, but I was also scared, and it just brought everything together into one activity. And I guess I didn't know much about outdoor climbing at that point, but I could see straight away that there was a lot of different ways you could climb. I'd heard a little bit that you could go bouldering, or I'd sort of heard about big walls and, mountaineering, and there just seemed like a lot of scope to kind of get into the sport and then find something even more interesting in there. Like you can really choose your own adventure with climbing. It doesn't have to be one thing. Like there's so many different sides to climbing.
And what sort of climbing were you doing at the time?
I think I started trad climbing from the beginning, and then sport climbing I could see it existed, or I'd see people get on sport climbs. But trad climbing I thought was actually the main type of climbing. When I then was exposed to more sport climbing, I thought that was a really weird thing. You know, I thought it was weird to put bolts into a rock and then you were just clipping quick draws, and I just sort of felt like it was quite strange because I'd been introduced to a rack and building anchors and all this stuff. So that was my normal idea of climbing.
And so that was around the time you finished high school. And did you go into study then, or?
After high school, I'd sort of gone into climbing, and that kind of got put aside to go and do a bit of study. So I did photography at RMIT, applied photography, at the time when we still hadn't transitioned to digital. So we were shooting film and developing everything. So it was a pretty funny time to be doing that course, because we were the last group that actually used film. The next year they ripped out a whole bunch of dark rooms and everyone transitioned to digital. So it was really... So,
what attracted you to photography in the first place?
I think I still remember my stepdad's he's collected just about every National Geographic from, I don't know, the 60s, whatever. So he's got this huge cabinet in the shed and it has every single edition. And I just remember flicking through those as a younger girl and just loving it, you know, just experiencing the world through images, that, you know, going to places that I'll never go to, or seeing people I'll never see, or, you know, you look at a photograph of a war-torn country and you're like, well, I'm probably never going to see that. And you get to step into someone else's shoes, and just those images, like the photography's always been incredible in the National Geographic. And I think that really caught me. And then I think my stepdad gave me a little Nikon FE, and I was, I don't know, 11 maybe. And I just ran around, like they have a farm, and I'd just run around and go on my adventures for hours and just photographing, you know, mushrooms and the mist and animals, and, you know, getting lost in the little forest in the back. And yeah, so for me it was, I think, always the adventure that came with the photography.
So photography was more like that means of capturing the story, or the pictures into this world, and you wanted to go and see those other worlds? Or? Yeah,
it's sort of, photography for me has been a good excuse to go and do and see a whole bunch of things that I might not normally do. So like, you know, you can go traveling, but I feel really weird if I travel without a camera, or if I go climbing without a camera. And I have at times done those things without a camera, but I think when you've got a camera in your hands and you're trying to capture a place or a person, you're far more tuned in. You're not just sort of wandering around. You're really looking, and you're really you're looking at the colours, and you're looking at the shapes, and you're looking at the light, and you're just really looking at a scene. And so if you've got a camera, I just think, for me, I get to experience like a deeper sort of scene. Yeah.
Where you are.
Yeah.
And during that course, I think you mentioned to me that you didn't really like the serious side of photography, or what you saw as a serious side of photography.
Yeah, I mean, it was a TAFE course, and it gears you towards, you know, getting out there and working, and gears you to work in the industry. And, you know, going back to looking at those images of in the National Geographics of travel and different cultures, for me, I just couldn't translate that to what they were sort of pitching to me, you know, like I wasn't ready to go and work in the industry and be a professional photographer and photograph commercial projects. It held little meaning to me. It's just like, why, you know, I get it, money making, but money's never ever been a draw card for me to this day. Like, you can, if I don't want to do it, you know, you can give me $2 million. And I'm like, nah, like, you know, so for me, when I was in there, I was like, well, I don't care about making money out of this. I just want to shoot well and learn all that I can. So yeah, I did not start working as a photographer straight away.
Yeah, what'd you do?
I went and partied. I went and did a couple of ski seasons. So I went to Wanaka, New Zealand, and then Falls Creek. I can't remember which one came first. And just went snowboarding and having a really good time. Yeah. Yeah, a bit of surfing. Yeah.
Bit of surfing as well.
Went around Australia and surfed a lot. And, yeah.
Okay. So place that in time for me. Like, what year is that around?
My life hasn't gone in a very straight line. So I actually forget when I've done things. It's all a bit of a blur.
Well, we can flit it back and forth and slowly piece the picture together over time. But in 2011, you created a coffee book about deer hunting in Fiordland in New Zealand.
Okay, so I'd put the camera down after RMIT and then thought I'll just go snowboarding and doing all these other things and travel. And I'd done this ski season, did a snowboarding season in Wanaka, and photography was always there in the back of my mind. It never left me. I just, wasn't interested for a while. And anyway, I was working in this little pizza shop as my night job so that I could snowboard during the day. And one day this scruffy old man walked in, he looked like kind of this overweight sailor with this woolen jumper with holes everywhere, and his hair's sideways, and he looked mad. But he knew the owner of the restaurant I worked for. And he said, and he said this to myself and the girl I was working with, Marion, this French girl. He said, if you girls, I'm a pilot. If you ever want to come down to Fiordland or Tiana, I'll take you deer hunting from my helicopter. We thought he was nuts. Anyway, we finished our little ski season and we went for a 2-week kind of tour around the South Island, got in our car. We ended up in Tiana and we had this phone number that he left us. And we're like, we're going to call this crazy man and stuff it. We'll call the crazy guy. His name was Dick Deaker. We called him and he ended up being probably one of the best helicopter pilots that New Zealand's ever made. He's kind of an absolute legend over there. So even though he looked like an absolute disheveled mess, he was the king of kings of, helicopter venison recovery. So we did go deer hunting from the helicopter with him. And Marion, my friend, she was into filmmaking already, and she ended up staying longer and making a film about the venison recovery over there. But being in that environment, that sparked my interest again to go and get a camera and to come back and document what we were doing. So I had a little point and shoot thing, and I was like, I've got to get a proper camera and actually document what's going on here.
And so you get back into photography at this point, and you're taking photos from helicopters. That's a little bit different.
So sort of. So I left New Zealand at that point, and I actually went back home to Australia and left Marion there. She shot this great film, and I went home and I worked and I saved money and bought this camera. And then I went back, I think a couple of years later, to shoot a book on it. So a publisher contacted me and said, hey, if you can get a chance to photograph the industry and to write about it and interview all the guys, I thought it'd be great. And I was like, I have no idea if this is possible. I was 24, 25, so super young. It's not really the kind of gig that especially a female at that age would get. It was super weird, and I'd be, talking to these 60-year-old men, going, hey, can I take photos of you? And they're like, who the hell are you? But it did work out, and I met the right people, and we did make a book out of it. So it was super left field. And one of the reasons they did let me to go and photograph them is because I was light. So for them to make money, they need to pick up the deer carcasses and hook them on and bring them back. And the reason they took me was because I didn't weigh much, and they're like, okay, well, you're only half a deer worth, so we're not going to lose too much money. Because there's a lot of big guys that want to get in there and, photograph this stuff, and they're like, nah, you're going to cost us money. So it was simple as that, really.
And so I want to talk about another adventure that you found yourself on that's probably a completely different tangent again, and that was at some point you sailed through Asia for 6 months on a yacht or something. Tell us about that.
Another random thing. So out of once I'd published the helicopter deer hunting book, I then sent it out for review to a bunch of magazines, and there was a magazine called Wild Deer Hunting Adventures, I believe, that picked it up and went, oh, cool, we'll review your book. And then they hired me as an editor, which was another really weird job I did because I was editing a deer hunting magazine. I'm not into hunting, by the way. I think it's probably the most sustainable way to get meat, but I'm not really into hunting. Anyway, I did that for a while, and it got to the point where I was quite sick of it, and I'm looking at dead animals all the time, and I needed a break. And so I randomly was like, well, I've never been sailing. I think maybe I'll try that next. And originally I wanted to go from Australia to New Zealand or New Zealand to Australia. And I found this random boat that was going that way. And at the time, the guy was like, well, I don't have room for you. I've already got crew. But you can come and sail from Broome and through Indonesia for 3 months if you like. And I just said yes, which was kind of nuts because I'd never sailed before.
Had you ever been on, like, did you know whether or not you got seasick or did you have any experience on the sea?
I just sailed once in New Zealand for maybe like 20 minutes or something. Like, I had no idea. I just was like, I need to do something different. So, yeah, and lucky I didn't get on the New Zealand trip because the rudder broke, like the actual rudder. And so they had to I can't remember exactly what happened, but they had to like get some ropes and like hand move the rudder to steer the boat the entire time. And they were in an insane storm and they videoed it and they were like surfing down these huge waves. So I'd been on that trip, I probably would have never sailed again. So yeah, I did end up going on this crazy 3-month trip that ended up being about 5-6 months. And I did take quick draws with me on that trip and climbing shoes and a harness because my end point was to climb in Tonsai, which never happened.
Why didn't that happen? What happened?
Yeah, so this sailing trip, we stopped in a lot of remote places. So we'd go to bigger cities, but, you know, when you're in a boat, you can drop anchor anywhere. Yeah. So I don't know what I got sick with, but I got very, very sick towards the end of that trip and ended up I did end up getting to Tonsai, but by that stage I was very sick with some kind of bug or virus or who knows what. And then I was in hospital for a couple of weeks and got home and I was pretty sort of weak and unwell for about a couple of years after that. So that
a couple of years? Yeah,
like my stomach, I couldn't eat anything for a really long time, like proper. So it took a long time to recover and a long time to get strength back and a long time to rebuild muscle and all that stuff. So, but I did go to Arapiles after that.
After that?
Yeah.
Okay, so like when you were feeling better, you were like, okay, time to hit you to Arapiles?
It wasn't that soon after, but yeah, I think it was like, you know, within a few months of coming home. I was unwell, but I mean, I was still functioning, you know. That was
like a time when you went to Arapiles. That you weren't working and you just kind of like dirtbagged in Arapiles for a while?
Yeah, that's when I went for a stint of 4 months. Just went, because I didn't get to climb in Tonsai, I still wanted to pursue that. And yeah, I wasn't working. I had nothing on. So I just was like, okay, let's go to Arapiles, set up a tent. And there was no time scale. Yeah. So just go. And we ended up staying for 4 months and staying through the summer, which is pretty insane. So yeah,
because it gets quite hot.
It gets really hot.
The summer at Arapiles.
Yeah.
And what's the lifestyle like in Arapiles like these days? I mean, you're in the pines, right? And it's a very kind of mythical place to do that kind of stint.
Yeah.
A lot of stories over time in Australian climbing about that. Like when you would have done it, 2012, 2013 or some point?
Somewhere there.
Somewhere around there. What was it like? What do you think it was like now versus maybe what it was like in the 90s or, you know?
Look, it's still pretty much, I think, the same, like very similar. It's probably a little bit busier. Mm-hmm. I think we're all experiencing that. Look, I think it's all, you know, the banter's the same. Sitting around the camp's the same. Drinking 5 coffees in the morning and starting at 11 o'clock is still the same, you know. Yeah, I think Arapiles hasn't changed much and it's quite a beautiful thing. Yeah. And it will change a bit, but I think it's generally got the same. It's a very similar vibe. I mean, you've got people that started climbing there 40 years ago, still climbing there, and they go there every year because it's Arapiles and it hasn't changed that much. You know, it's sort of this little secret pocket in the world. That's not that secret, but, you know.
How did your climbing go? Like, how did kind of being 4 months of just focusing on that go?
Yeah, it went well until we started drinking way too much tea and coffee in the mornings and then kind of not even climbing at all, which is when you should leave. When you start drinking more tea than climbing, that's when it's like it's time to leave Arapiles. But yeah, I just did a ton of probably more easier climbing, actually. Lots of long multi-pitches, you know, extreme picnicking, you know, all the classics. Yeah, I mean, it's summer as well, so you've got the longest days ever. You can climb so much. You can climb into the afternoon, in the night. It was a really good summer. So
yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
And what caused you to leave Arapiles in the end? You kind of mentioned that it seemed like you were drinking more coffee than you were climbing, or tea.
Yeah, by that stage, I think I'd met Simon Bischoff.
Okay.
Who then, my path changed completely after I met Simon. I can't remember when I was there, but it was after the book was published and some of my photos were in there, like the guiding book. And I wasn't taking many photos, but he was like, well, why aren't you combining photography and climbing? Like, that's all you're doing. Like, that's all you want to do. And I guess I'd never really thought of it. Even though I'd taken a few photos for the guide, it was more of like, oh, this is fun. I'm combining these things. But he was like, well, why aren't you doing that all the time? Like, what, but it had never dawned on me that I could combine them. So that year was when that idea was actually put into my mind, and I caught onto it and went, oh, yeah, you're right. Why am I not doing this?
And what steps did you take to pursue it after that?
I hung out with Simon. He was like, come on some rad trips with me and bring your camera and see what you come up with.
Okay. And what was the first rad trip?
So the first one would have been, Flinders Island.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know a lot about Flinders Island. Tell me, where is Flinders Island?
It's a tiny island above Tassie.
Okay.
And it's about 700 residents, I think.
Oh, it's like actually populated.
It's populated.
Okay.
It has quite a big Indigenous population, I think.
Okay.
It's a pretty wild place, lots of snakes, lots of animals running around, like the animals own the place. Beautiful beaches.
How do you get there? Is it just kind of like...
You can either catch a flight,
a
little tiny plane, little rattly plane, or you can do what we did. We got on the little ferry, which is usually used sort of for the locals or to transport livestock or supplies or whatever. It's not a nice ferry. So you get on this thing and it has to go out on the tide, so you have to wait. And sometimes it doesn't go out because it's not quite right. And, you get on there and I don't know if I should be saying this, but, the captain is possibly smoking something.
Yeah. So it's confidence inspiring.
Yeah. And, there was a storm coming in and there was 4 of us and, you put your car on there, basically. It's a good way of getting all the gear on there. You get the car on there. And, you're just rocking and swaying for hours in amongst hay bales and all this stuff. And you go down the bottom and it kind of smells like a pub and urine because, like, the toilet's splishing and splashing everywhere and you sort of lay on the ground trying to get some sleep. And it's pretty brutal trip over to Flinders Island.
Do you think people should probably take the plane if they're going there for like
they
a
should
nice
probably
little
take
leisurely
the plane.
climbing trip?
Yeah, and hire a car.
Yeah.
But if you do want to get your car over, that's the only way to get your car over.
Yeah.
So
what sort of climbing is?
So there's granite. Yeah. So we went to Strzelecki. There's a few routes up there. So it almost feels like alpine climbing. Like Flinders Island is beautiful blue water, granite boulders with orange lichen. It's sort of quite tropical-ish, but then you've got like this alpine climbing on Strzelecki. It gets really misty. Yeah. And then you've got rocks like Killiecrankie's kind of more orangey pinky rock, sort of similar to Arapiles, but not quite. Pretty amazing. You've got the beach to look at the whole time, ocean views. So it's a special place. Yeah. Super special. Yeah.
And you took some kind of standout photos there, as I understand.
Yeah. So I'd sort of decided to just say yes to whatever Simon said because he seemed to go on really good adventures. Okay. And I was like, you know what? I think I do want to combine photography and climbing and trips and adventures. Yeah, we ended up, we were driving along in the car and he had binoculars and we screeched to a halt and we all get out and Simon's like, there, that's what I want to climb. And we get the binoculars out and we're looking and there's like this big cliff and then this huge like boulder kind of coming over with this huge splitter crack running up it. And he was like, yeah, let's go there, let's walk there. And so there's no track, and we're bush bashing and like we went there the next day with full packs and everything and, we'd stepped over a million snakes. Like I think I stepped over there was one section where it was kind of like a video game. We had to like jump over the snake, and I think there were like 7 snakes in the space of like 6 meters. And you're kind of like, do I keep jumping? Are there going to be more, or should I turn back? Or it was pretty nuts. And like going up these slabs that are like almost vertical, and you don't want to slip. And we did end up getting to that crack. We found it, and that year Simon did try and climb it. He ended up aiding through it.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I happened to be in the right spot with my camera, and the light was amazing. And I got this shot that ended up getting into rock and ice, and it was pretty awesome. It made me kind of go, okay, you have to go outside of the box and on pretty nuts adventures to get these photos. You can't. Arapiles is great, but it made it clear that you've kind of got to go a little bit further and go do something a little bit crazier, and that's where those images are.
So one other thing that I understand happened on that trip was that you got like a jack jumper sting, and you went into anaphylactic shock. Yep,
good times. Yeah, that summer I developed a allergic reaction to jack jumpers, and the reason being is that I grew up on a farm, and every year when we were blueberry picking, I'd get bitten by the same nest of jack jumpers, but I didn't know that they were jack jumpers, and that if you get bitten lots and lots of times, you get really allergic.
Like anyone?
Not anyone. You probably need to be, probably not anyone.
Yeah, okay.
But I got bitten a lot, and I'd just be like, oh yeah, okay, well that's, I'll just be tough and whatever. It's an ant bite. So before the Flinders trip, I'd had 2 episodes where, I was bitten, had to go to hospital and got dealt with there. And then I went to Flinders Island, and I didn't realise that Tassie and Flinders Island have a ridiculous amount of jack jumpers. We'd spent almost, 2 weeks there, and I hadn't been bitten. I knew they were around. And this was towards the end of the trip. We'd sort of climbed everything we'd wanted to climb. And we had this big party on the beach. There was only 3 of us left. And we sort of spent the whole night up, swimming in phosphorescent water and looking at the stars and just having a nice old party. And in the morning, we're like, trotted off to bed, And as I got into my tent, I was like, I feel really weird. And it's not because I'm tired or that I've been up all night. I feel like something's wrong. And then Simon found a bite on my shoulder, and he was like, yeah, I think you've been bitten. And at this stage, I didn't take my allergy seriously, and I didn't know where my EpiPens were, and I just kind of had chucked them in a bag. We found them, and, we're all tired, and we've had a big night, and I had 2 with me, and Simon used the first one, and the needle snapped, like it kind of bent. And then by this stage, I'm passing out, and I remember just handing him the EpiPen going, you've got to like just read the instructions and work it out. And I did. I completely passed out. Apparently had a fit or something. I don't remember. And Simon had managed to use the other one, and then carried me up these sand dunes and got me into the car. And then I think we were driving it I remember looking at the speedo. I think we were going somewhere between like 130, 160 k's an hour on this really bad road, trying to get to this tiny little hospital in Flinders Island, which is just a house, looks like a little house. And yeah, I kind of got there in time, and it was, pretty annoying.
Oh yeah, it's a minor inconvenience.
Yeah. So,
are you allergic to any other things apart from jack jumpers? So it's just jack jumpers. Okay. So do you have to now pick places where there are no jack jumpers?
Yeah. Okay. And it sucks. It sucks. It's definitely stopped me from doing a whole bunch of trips I want to do, especially by myself. Yeah. I can't just go for a bushwalk by myself. I can't go and do really simple things. You don't think about it until you're in the situation. I'm like, I'm just going to go walk this way through the Grampians. Oh, maybe I should tell someone, and maybe I should bring EpiPen. So it has stopped my lifestyle in a way. But at the same time, I love, going to places like New Zealand, and I do find other places where I can do the things I want to do. So it's slightly limiting. Arapiles has got no jack jumpers. It is, paradise. So I want to go back to Flinders really badly, but it's something that I'll have to, something I have to think about if I'm going to go do that.
Yeah, and you'll have to take EpiPens with you.
Yeah. And today I learned how my friends did a wilderness first aid course and taught me that you can get 4 more doses out of an EpiPen. So I feel pretty good now. Yeah.
EpiPens are expensive, are they?
They're expensive, yeah.
Okay. So if you can squeeze more out of one EpiPen, then, you know.
Yeah. If you can get 5 doses out of one, great. It's going to be good.
But, I mean, it's not as simple as just jam it in, right? And, okay, all good, I can go back about my day.
No, that's the most annoying thing. Like, I don't care if I get bitten, whatever, that's fine, you deal with it. But it's that you need to make sure that your body's dealing with the allergy. So you've got to take antihistamines and some steroids, and you've got to wait and make sure that the allergy doesn't come back up. So what's annoying is that usually you have to go and sit in hospital for a few hours and they monitor you. So it's annoying. It's a really annoying allergy. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of gets in the way of doing adventures and so forth.
Yeah.
And so when you're at Flinders Island, that idea of adventure and taking photos and climbing and combining it all kind of took off for you. What happened after that? Like, what was the next adventure after Flinders Island?
Flew home.
Yeah.
Edited some photos together. I wrote an article about it that was published, I think, like a year or two later. So those things take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then I actually ended up working a bit. So I ended up working in helicopters again.
Okay.
So I was in New South Wales photographing power poles. So after the Black Saturday bushfires, the government stepped in and went, well, a lot of them were caused by faulty power lines.
Oh, okay.
And so companies now, like Essential Energy, those kind of companies have to go around and they have to go and figure out how many poles they actually own and in what condition they are. So I went around and photographed them for a few weeks. Anyway, I was doing that and I received a phone call from Simon Bischoff, and he was like, we need another videographer for this thing we're doing in Federation Peak in winter. What experience do you have in bushwalking? Like, have you filmed? What have you done? And all my answers were like, no, I've not done an overnight hike. No, I don't know how to film. No, I have no experience in camping in snow. And he was like, oh yeah, no, but you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You should do it anyway. But, he did say, look, call me back and think about it. So that was the next adventure.
What did that trip entail? Like, when you were actually assessing it, am I going to go? Am I not going to go?
So I went online and Googled Federation Peak. I had no idea what it was. So Federation Peak is in southwest Tassie. It's a beautiful peak. It's got Australia's tallest vertical climb on it, Blade Ridge going into the northwest face. Anyway, these guys wanted to film a winter ascent of Federation Peak. I'd Googled it, and there was some article about a woman who just a few weeks earlier had fallen off trying to bushwalk up Federation Peak. It's not really a bushwalk up there. It's kind of a scramble, and some people use ropes. But I looked at that and went, wow, someone died trying to get up there like a few months ago. What am I doing? So, it's like it's only a 20-kilometre walk in, but it's bush bashing, crawling on hands and knees, walking in mud up to your waist or higher. There's no track really, like there is, but there isn't. Leeches. It's super tangly, vegetated, cold, wet, rivers. Yeah, not a bushwalk.
No.
Not a normal bushwalk.
But it sounded appealing to you?
No, well, I decided I was going to say yes to everything.
Okay.
It was more that, I was just like, I'm going to say yes to any great ideas, and Simon Bischoff has fun ideas, so I'll say yes.
And then you just...
It was more just me saying yes. I was like, yeah.
And what were you hoping to get out of it going into it?
I think the same thing that I got out of Flinders Island, just learning to be more self-sufficient, to be in remote places, learn new skills, confidence. And Flinders Island proved to me that to get good images, you have to go just that little bit step further, that little bit further. Okay.
And you were kind of pushing. How did the expedition actually go? Was it successful?
It was successful in the end. So Simon Bischoff and Andy did make a film out of it. Andy was sort of the brainchild behind the idea, and then Simon filmed it. It went super well. It was supposed to be a 12-day mission, which ended up being a 17-day mission. So we did have to ration food in the end.
What caused it to drag out?
We got no climbing days.
What?
It just rained. It just rained the entire time. So, You know, like, to be honest, it was probably the most grim trip I've ever been on, and probably some of those guys have been on. You know, we ran out of food. It was freezing. It wasn't, you know, it would have been better if it was snowing or just not raining, but it was like we're in a constant cloud the whole time. I was in Simon's tent, and he'd brought a single shelled tent, which is really good for dry winters and snow. But in Tassie, in wet conditions, it pretty much rains more inside the tent than outside the tent. Like every day there was just like pouring down rain inside. Like there was just so much condensation. Yeah, it was kind of
So
grim.
you guys are just kind of like wet.
We were wet the whole
miserable.
time. We were wet for 17 days. Sleeping bags, everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, that makes you super, super cold. And because we had to carry so much gear, we had our dry gear, like one set of dry gear, one set of wet gear. And you went outside, you put on your wet boots, wet gear. On climbing day, you know, we were pouring boiling hot water into our boots to unfreeze them, things like that. Leeches, you know, on your face, on your hands. I remember one of the guys, Miko, like we were hungry and he'd be eating salt and pepper, just salt and pepper. That's it, because there's no food. So you just yeah. And like Simon Bischoff ended up eating coffee grains.
And so how many days in and there is no food?
No, we had food, but we had to ration it. So about halfway through, we were supposed to be there for 12 days, I think. Ended up being 17. And about halfway through, it's about within like a week, we realised we're getting satellite weather updates. So we're there for a week and we looked at the weather and we could see that we had a slither of a possible weather window right at the end. So we had to push everything. And then there was like just food rationing going on. So no lunch pretty much for the last 5 days kind of thing.
Okay.
And
well, how is the morale going through the group in those conditions?
I'll tell you what, it's the best trip I've ever been on.
Okay.
And you know why? Because it was hilarious. It was so grim that everything was funny. You know, like there was no point complaining because that's what we were doing. We were there. And I remember my abs hurting when I'd gotten home from the trip because we'd laughed so much. It was a hilarious trip. You know, you just... Little things like Savo would play with the guy rope of the tent and make music, and you'd sit there laughing for, you know, half an hour at him. And then I think Dan brought in a flute, and you'd just walk off into the distance playing the flute into the mist. You know, we went mad.
Yeah.
We actually went mad.
They achieved the objective?
Yeah. So we had this slither of a window and we did achieve it. We got it on day 15, I guess, because it takes 2 days to walk out. Yeah. And yeah, we did. We woke up and it was a beautiful clear night the night before and everything frosted over, and they got up and they did, and they climbed it. I think it took them 13 hours from memory. Okay. Might be really wrong about that, but I think it was 13. They climbed Blade Ridge and they finished around, I think it was 4 p.m. And then they could have probably stopped at that point and not done the next part of the climb up, like the direct up the face. But they continued on. They finished in the night and they did it. Yeah. And
were you there to take photos of them while they were doing it?
Yeah. So Simon and I were sort of like on this other little pinnacle off to the side filming them. There's another guy filming from the top. Yeah. Dan was filming from the top. So yeah, we got the climbing film and then we walked out.
Yeah. Yep. And coming out of it, you feel it was a positive experience? Because I mean, if you pitched that to someone as do you want to go and do this? Yeah, someone would. I mean, the answer would probably be no for the majority of people, but you feel like it was a really worthwhile and valuable experience. It
was. I think it's gonna go down as one of the best trips I've ever done. And it was the people. You know, those trips are made by the people you're with. Like, you can climb great things and be in a nice wilderness, but it's the people that you share those experiences with. That's what lasts, and those bonds that you make last. So, yeah, good, funny people that can suffer in happiness, in style.
True.
Yeah.
So you're like really into the Sufferfest now?
I'm not, but I keep doing it. I don't know why. I think once you do something, you have to then up you do the next thing, you do the next harder thing, or you find something that's slightly more challenging. Because if you do something less challenging or less hard, you're not satisfied.
I want to hear about your experience in Yosemite, because I know you climb the nose, right?
Yeah.
And not a lot of people get to climb the nose, and it seems like every time I watch videos of people doing it, it seems really daunting, and I mean, especially for someone doing it the first time, like a bit of an epic. How was it for you?
It was good.
God, I want to hear more than that.
Yeah. The thing that, so people they're usually surprised, like they'll look at my Instagram and they look at the photos and things and they think that I'm like this hardcore climber that climbs big grades and, you know, doing all these epic stuff. And that, you know, I live for the mountains, and I do. Like, I love the mountains, but like I didn't care about climbing the nose.
No?
I didn't know what it was even. My friend suggested it, and I'd heard of the nose, and I knew it was a big climb. And, you know, she was like, oh, I really want to do the nose. Come and train with me and see if we can do it. And at the time I was living in Natimuk, and I was working in town for the paper, and I was like, all right, I'll quit my job as a photojournalist and I will pack everything up and we'll go to Squamish for 2 months to learn how to climb crack and granite and aid climb. And then we'll go to Yosemite and see if we can do the nose. But the entire time I was more interested in learning how to aid climb. I was more interested in learning another aspect of climbing. And the nose was just like this kind of bonus. I really didn't.
It was about the journey to get to the nose.
Yeah, I didn't mind at all. And when I was doing it, I was like, this is cool. Like, and it was cool. It was really cool. I look back and go, I'm so glad I did that. Yeah. It's an epic journey. But even when I was doing it, I was like, okay, this is cool. And after I did it, I was like, that's cool. But it was never much deeper than that. Same as like things like, someone recently told me they're a guide on Mount Aspiring, and there was this guy that had tried, I think 7 times, and on his 7th attempt of Mount Aspiring, he finally got to the summit. And when I did Mount Aspiring, I had no idea what it was, and I'd never used crampons or an ice axe, and we did it without ropes, and I went up there with random people and I did Mount Aspiring, and it was kind of an accident, and people were like, oh, you've done Mount Aspiring. You're like, oh, I guess so. Like, I don't have that kind of, I don't care about getting to the top or like completing really big hard climbs or climbing big grades. Yeah. So the nose was awesome, and I highly recommend it. And if you can climb solid grade 18 on trad, you can do the nose. Yeah. It's not, it's hard work. It's like physically, mentally demanding, you know, for 4 or 5 days. It's a hard job, but I think, you know, you get so intimidated by things that once you're doing them, you're like, oh, well, it's a big thing, but if you split it up into little pieces, it's the same thing. Yeah. So, yeah, that was my experience of the nose.
And that
was awesome.
So just more about the journey than
the journey, yeah.
And the journey was going to Squamish in Canada, learning all those skills that you needed to get to pull together. Yeah. And that just came out of you saying yes to someone that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a running theme of my life. I just go, yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll try.
Because why would you say no? You know, like, you live once. If something comes into your life and it sounds kind of cool, I would rather say yes to everything and stuff up half of them than say no and think, wow, I could have done something really fun. Yeah.
So while you're in North America, you get the opportunity to go to the Banff Film Festival for Winter on the Blade, which was that experience from down in Tasmania. Yeah. How did you end up there?
It's sort of a tricky story, but Simon Bischoff was in the States with us as well, and he was actually supposed to go. It's his film. And he had a problem with his passport. It got damaged, and so he couldn't fly over, or he couldn't get over there quick enough. And I was like, well, stuff it. I'm going to take your place. And I'm glad
Did you tell him, or did he offer?
Well, he offered a few of us, but I ended up going, and it was super awesome to watch Winter on the Blade on this huge screen in front of all these people, and I got to present it with Andy, I think a few nights in a row, and it was a seriously awesome experience. So the Banff Mountain Film Festival is like the Oscars, you know, of outdoor films. Yeah. It was such a super awesome environment. Australia's got a cool outdoor scene, like it's awesome here, but the scale of it over in Canada, over in the States, it's just gigantic. Like climbing mountains, it's just, they live and breathe them. It's such a big part of their lives because of the environment they're in. Like we don't have that here in Australia, so it's different. But yeah, and seeing all the films and the talks and all the presentations, and then also you get to see the films, but as a participant, you also get to go into a room that has all the films that didn't make it. And there are hundreds and hundreds of incredible outdoor films that we never get to see, which is super sad. But yeah, that was probably one of the highlights, was just sitting there for hours going through awesome imagery, awesome stories. Yeah. Yeah. That we never get to see. It's so frustrating.
You talk about Australia not really having that kind of mountaineering scene, but we're not far from New Zealand, which you do have this kind of ongoing relationship as well with, because I guess the mountains over there, right? And you went over there to climb Mount Aspiring. How did you just kind of, was that another situation where someone suggested it and you were like, yep, I'm on it?
Yeah, yep. Pretty much. I went over there so after the Yosemite, I came back to Australia, and then I instantly wanted to leave and go hang out and go climbing and, all that stuff. You always come back from a holiday and you want to go back to your holiday. So that's what I did. Went to New Zealand. I'd already been there a few times. Like I go back there all the time. It's like my second home, and just rock climbed and actually got into sport climbing. So sport climbed quite a lot, the most I'd ever sport climbed ever in my life, which was super fun actually, because after doing the nose, you got to think so much on the nose and you're using trad gear, and it's so much more serious that to then go to New Zealand and just sport climb was mentally relieving. It was really good. But I was supposed to go into the Darrens and do like a big mission with someone, and it fell through. And that person was like, oh, you should meet my friend Anna. She's into mountains and she works in Fiordland as a conservationist, and she's like really psyched to do Mount Aspiring. You should go do that. And I just went, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, Mount Aspiring, that sounds impressive, whatever. And met up at the cafe, and they were like, oh, have you used crampons or an ice axe? Like, no, like I've snowboarded. I know what snow is.
How did they respond to that?
They were like, oh, yeah, well, you've done the nose, so you'll be fine. So, which was silly in a way, because like climbing a big wall is different to mountaineering, whole other world. But, they weren't rock climbers. So they kind of went, well, that's kind of big and scary. So this is big and scary. It's probably going to equate to a similar skill level or whatever.
Maybe they saw that you had the mental grit.
Maybe.
To deal with it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe. Did I? Yeah, so, we packed our stuff, and the next day we were driving off to Mount Aspiring, and I was with Anna and her friend Alex, who wanted to do it in a push as well, New Zealand style. So New Zealanders, like Tasmanians, they want to do everything to extreme, and they want to push hard, and they're all super fit and have legs made of steel, which I don't. I'm not hardly any of those things, but I tend to hang out with New Zealanders and Tasmanians, and yeah, but so we did it in a push and ended up climbing this thing. And when I got to the top, like we could see Mount Cook and all these other mountains, and that's when it dawned on me that I was like proper mountaineering. And then I had crampons that didn't fit very well, and I had only one ice axe. And on the descent down from the summit, I was like calling down to those guys, because I was like, guys, I don't actually know how to down climb in crampons. And I remember looking down, and if I had a slip there, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. And that was probably the first time in my life that I went, oh, Olivia, maybe you shouldn't say yes to everything all the time, and maybe you should educate yourself a little bit about what you're getting yourself into. Because I thought, this is one of those moments where an Australian falls off Mount Aspiring and they die, and then it goes into the news, and it's just another kind of one of those mountain accidents that shouldn't have happened, but that person was silly enough to go up there without the skills.
But so that didn't happen, right?
It didn't happen, but it was a good moment of realization. It's like accidents do happen. And after doing Mount Aspiring, I then Googled Mount Aspiring and looked at all the stories attached to that mountain. And there are heaps of accidents and deaths associated to that mountain, especially with Australians, because a lot of Australians go and do that as their first mountain. And I didn't even know what it was, and I went and did it. And I think if I hadn't known what I was doing, I probably would have chosen otherwise. So it was a good lesson to maybe for next time, think about it a little bit more, because I'd gotten away with so many things.
Yeah.
And in that one moment when I was on the top, I was like, I might not get away with this one.
Yeah.
But I did. Yeah.
And you come back at some point, you try and establish a women's climbing festival in the Grampians.
Yeah.
What was the driver for that?
Going over to Canada, the States, other places, I noticed that, especially in Squamish, like the women there are just like, their shoulders are out here and they're super strong and they're just crushing. And I was like, wow, like there are these women that are just dominating in the sport. And Australia, New Zealand, like, we're kind of behind the times in a lot of things. It just takes a bit longer for all these things to trickle down to us. We don't have those huge mountains or those big, huge splitter cracks, or we don't have big walls. So the climbers that come out of Australia are very different to the climbers in the States or Europe or whatever. But I was just super inspired at seeing these really strong females climbing. That does happen in Australia, but there's kind of a handful. And I kind of wanted to create something in Australia like that. I wanted to change the environment. And I guess the way I thought that I could change that would be through some kind of festival, because then you could run workshops and you could educate people and you can bring females together to support each other and build confidence in each other and go out and climb together. I've spent most of my life climbing with guys, and you kind of start to question that. It's the same as like Federation Peak, Flinders Island, the Nose, everything that I've done up until sort of recently has been with guys. And it becomes a pattern, and you're like, why am I just here with guys? Like, I know there's women that can climb, but there's just less of them. So I wanted to create an environment that you could get women together to meet each other and come together and help each other, rise and become better climbers.
How did it go?
Yeah, it's still going.
Yeah, it's still in the works.
It's in the works. So I got together with a chick called Jo who runs Women Uprising at North Walls, and she puts on workshops that are women focused. And I sort of approached her because I couldn't do the job by myself. Putting a festival on is a huge task. And so we did get together and we were trying to go through a government grant, and it didn't go through, which is fine because we originally didn't want to go through a grant. We just started looking at ideas. But she's now running, like, for example, this weekend right now at Arapiles, she's got a lead climbing workshops for women running over the weekend. So there's small things going on. I still would like to create something a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
So it's still in the works. I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm talking to climbing companies in the Grampians and Arapiles. I'm talking to climbers. I'm talking to gyms, talking to stores. So
watch this space.
Watch this space.
You did win a grant though last year, a women's adventure grant. So what was your pitch that won that?
Because I'd spent so much time in Fiordland, flying over it, photographing that book years and years ago, I had always wanted to walk Fiordland. So people don't really walk through Fiordland because it's so steep and it's glacier country, huge glaciated U-shaped valleys, sheer, it's the scale of Yosemite except with a ton of water. It rains like 8 meters a year there. It's super wet, super vegetated. It's on the west coast. Like the weather that comes in there is just gnarly. But I'd always wanted to walk those ridge lines. And so when I applied for the grant, I threw in this crazy idea of getting a bunch of chicks and going completely off track and doing like a huge ridgeline traverse or a first ascent. It's not too hard to do a first ascent up there. Some of the peaks have been climbed, or especially a climbing ascent. You can easily put up a climbing ascent there, 600 meter climbing ascent, whatever. So I just threw in this idea and called up a couple of my Tasmanian friends, Liz and Rosie, and was like, oh, well, this is my idea and would you do it if I won? Probably not going to win. They were like, yeah, cool. And then I called Anna, who I did Mount Aspiring with, because she works in Fiordland as a conservationist. So she knew Fiordland really well and she was a mountain girl. And your same thing, I'm probably not going to win, you know, but would you do it if we won? And we did win. So, yeah.
Before you left for that expedition, you posted an answer on Instagram that I want to put to you now. And it was an answer to a question. Why make an all-female adventure film? So why?
Why not? No. Okay, so I suppose when I look back to how I grew up in a family that wasn't musical or outdoorish or anything. I had to discover this stuff by myself. And I think when you don't have any mentors around you, like I didn't have rock climbing parents or anything like that. They didn't surf. They didn't do anything like that. You've got to find that stuff yourself. And then where do you go? You go towards media. You go to magazines. Like as a young person, you might watch movies or buy a snowboarding magazine or whatever. And I just found when I looked back at my life, I didn't have any of those things. I don't remember reading any books or reading any magazines that had someone like me, a female, doing the things that I wanted to do. There were always these big burly blokes. And like surfing magazines, the typical one is the guys catching this huge wave and then there's an ad and there's a chick in a G-string bikini thing holding the surfboard with the sun in her hair. And that's what you're told is that's your job as a woman. This is what you're going to grow up to be. You're going to hold someone's towel as they go surfing. And I don't want to live in that world. Like I wish that I'd grown up, you know, knowing about Lynn Hill. I mean, I didn't, but, you know, there's other strong female climbers that women mountaineers that I'd never heard of that I've only learned about now. Like they've always existed, but media has always focused on the male achievement. And I mean, I don't have children. I don't know if I'll have them, but I don't want every other little girl to grow up thinking she's going to hold someone's towel. I want her to grow up and go, I'm going to climb the biggest mountain I can find and feel confident that she can do that and the world will support her in that. So why make a female climbing film? Well, because I want younger women to see that and go, I can do that. Because unless you see someone that you can relate to doing something that you want to do, quite often you don't feel like you can do that. And
so you guys set out and your objective is to like climb a certain amount of peaks or to reach a certain point. What was the objective?
Yeah. So Anna and I planned most of the trip because she spends time there and I knew the terrain pretty well. Yeah. The idea was so if you're going to climb in New Zealand and find really good rock, you'll go to the Darrans and then that's probably where you'll stop. And then you've got the fjords that start and the landscape behind. We wanted to go completely off track, so we decided we're going to go over Milford or Milford Sound and go and do something further in. So we found a few peaks that we wanted to join together and something that Anna had been looking at for a while. She wanted to traverse these peaks. But because Liz and Rosie were rock climbers, I was like, well, we need to put a rock climbing element in there so they want to do the trip. Anna was more like, I just want to, race across the country. She's a climber as well, but not as much. She's more just a mountain goat. So it became sort of a traverse that we were doing from peaks called Terror Peak to Mount Danger to Lady of the Snows. It's about 20 kilometres. So ridgeline, like full on just ridgeline traverse the entire way. And there was one peak in particular. I was like, well, maybe we should try climbing this. And it's unofficially called the Tusk. There was a guy called Hugh Willoughby who tried to climb it in the 70s, who used to do bird research in that region on the Kakapo. And he one day went up and tried to solo it and he tragically fell. So no one knows if he ever made it or not. So in between Terror Peak and Mount Danger, I was like, well, hey girls, there's this thing called the Tusk. We should try and aim to get there for base camp and see if you can climb it. So we actually only ever got that far because the weather is so bad in New Zealand or in Fiordland. We knew when I was putting the idea together, I knew that we would probably not be able to do the entire traverse just because of how Fiordland is. Like we went through 2 storms and we were going to go through a third one if we stayed longer. Okay. So the reason we got out in the end was because we had a forecast of 162 mil of rain in an evening, which is just insane.
Okay, that's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot. Where we were camping, so our base camp, we were at a lake called Lake Liz, and you've got this sort of cirque kind of head wall, and it's something that we'd scrambled down to get to Lake Liz. And when we went through Storm 2, that entire cirque was like this veil of waterfalls, and the lake's rising. Like there's just, Fiordland is just water and stone and vegetation clinging on. So to stay in on a forecast of 162 mil, and to then think you can do a ridgeline traverse, like continue on, was really, really foolish. So we did get out after 10 days.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it was like an ambitious attempt to climb the Tusk, to get the FA of the Tusk.
Yeah.
Was it another sufferfest along the way?
Ooh, it was a different type of sufferfest. Because we wanted to do the traverse, we knew we would be in for some bad weather, and that's just what happens in Fiordland. Like you'll maybe get 3 or 4 days, and then you're going to go through a storm. So day 2, we knew we would be in 50 mil of rain. And so we'd gotten across the fjord, we'd camped one night, and then we had this hike up this huge spur to get up to the tops. And only maybe 5 people have ever done this walk, and you're literally like, it's vertical, like you're pulling on plants, overhanging flax, tussock. If you let go, that's it. It was vertical.
And you're roped up, or?
You're not roped up. You can't rope up. It's just jungle, and it's vertical, and we're just doing this for, hours and hours and hours to get up this spur. Super slippery. Yeah, pretty horrendous. So it's kind of free soloing vegetation, to get to the tops. But basically we're going up this spur. Now we knew we had this really bad forecast of 50 mil of rain, and we couldn't get stuck on the spur. So in one spot, for example, it was probably maybe 10 meters across, and then it just dropped down into the valleys, like sheer drops. So you don't want to be there in 50 mil of rain and winds. We eventually did get to a flatter part of the spur, which was almost at the tops, and we made camp. And that night was probably one of the worst nights I think any of us have been through. So we settle in for the night, and by midnight we're all awake because this wind has just picked up. And we thought, we knew the rain was coming, but we didn't realize the wind was what was going to get us. And you could hear, you've got these huge head walls, and you could just hear this wind like roaring. It sounds like, a million trains coming towards you, and it would hit the tents. And our tent poles snapped, and this is day 2. Our tent poles snapped, like the cords snapped, guy ropes are flying off. We're sitting in like puddles this deep, and so like to try and repin the guy lines is impossible because we've lost all our pegs. We're using ice axes to keep stuff down, and ropes. At one point, so Anna and Liz were sharing a tent. And at one point, Anna got out to fix a guy line, and she was explaining that the tent lifted up, like, sort of with Liz in it. And it looked like the tent was going to fly off this spur. And Anna had to get back in so that, because Liz is quite small. And
to help weigh it down.
And so we spent from 12 o'clock to 8 o'clock, all of us, we had 2 different tents, and we're just doing this, keeping it up for 8 hours. No sleep. Like exhausting. Rosie ended up putting on her helmet in the tent because the wind was so violent that she just got sick of like being hit in the head.
Getting smacked in the head by the tent.
Yeah. It was so, I can't remember what your original question was, but
it was it a sufferfest? And I think the resounding answer is yes.
Yeah, it was a sufferfest. But
that was the second day into 10 days.
That was the second day. And everything got wet, but we knew we were getting a really nice 3 days after that.
Okay.
So, the sun came out in the morning, and we dried everything off, sleeping bags, everything, and then scrambled up a little bit higher to the point where we wanted to start our traverse and camped again. And then we had this incredible day to get to Lake Liz, which was 12 hours of walking along and, the rock changed from really hard granite to choss piles that were just falling to pieces. But, they were knife edge, and you're just walking along just like both sides. And you've got you've got the sea right there. So you've got the west coast. But both sides are just sheer drops. And we had to rappel a couple of times. No one had walked where we walked. So there was no beta. We had, we had maps, but it was like you'd kind of look and go, well, that looks good. Let's go that way.
You just had to use your judgment.
Use your judgment. And you know, little things like we ended up making 2 rappels. You know, in this one section it was super blocky and chossy, and we'd forgotten the 12 meters of tat that I'd bought and put it in the heli drop that was coming later. We had a heli drop halfway through the trip on day 5 because we needed more gear. So I'd bought 12 meters of tat that we could use if we needed to rappel and leave stuff. So we'd forgotten that, and so all of a sudden we're in a situation where we have to rappel, and Liz and Rosie made this anchor that was my Prusik, I think, on this horn, and the top of it had like this crack running around. It was kind of moving, but the bottom bit was okay, and then like a backup cam that was like good for an outward pull, and that's what we wrapped off because that was all we could find.
Yeah.
And but that was the mission, you know, like we had no other options and no beta, and we wanted to get to Lake Liz to do this traverse that no one had done. And so, you know, things like that. And like Liz had to down climb some stuff. Like she was the stronger climber. So we'd set up, you know, an abseil, we'd all go down, and then, you know, someone has to down climb because you don't want to leave your anchor. And so we'd maybe put a piece or 2 in, and then Liz would kind of down climb this sketchy sort of slab. And yeah, it was pretty exciting. But
what was the mood like? I mean, did you feel like you were taking big risks?
It felt, I think we were all capable.
Yeah.
But yeah, we all had to dig a little bit deep at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think we're all uncomfortable in certain times. Like, for example, during that part of the traverse, one of the girls accidentally kicked a huge, only just tapped at this rock, a huge rock though, and only just tapped it with her foot, and it went flying down. And we're all walking separately at this time because rocks are falling, so we don't want to, you know, drop rocks on each other. And this huge rock fell, and Rosie was below, and it went hurtling towards her. But she looked up and had the sun in her eyes and couldn't actually see where this rock was coming from, and kind of jumped out of the way, and then another rock went flying. And things like that would happen where it was just like, oh, that could have been really bad, because if you fall off here, you fall forever.
Yeah.
Learning to trust vegetation, learning to trust to pull on tussock and be completely okay with that. Like, it felt like ice climbing on vegetation a lot of the time, and slab. Like, you're kind of like mixed climbing on rock and then pulling on all these plants, and you're like, is that bit of moss okay? And you make these really weird techniques. Like there was the prong, which was things like this. You put it into the moss and then twist, and it would work. And you just like do that, or there's certain plants that you knew were really bad and they'd come out of the rock really easily.
Yeah. So you got to learn like what was what would deep root itself and what was good to pull on and what wasn't.
Yeah. So it was all kind of sketchy all the time, but controlled sketch.
Yeah, okay.
Controlled sketch.
Controlled sketch. So did you guys finish the traverse, or did you get up the Tusk in the end?
So we didn't finish the traverse. There was never a high likelihood of that. We would have liked to. But we did climb the Tusk. So we did have a 162 mil forecast of rain come in at about day 8 via satellite. And that kind of rain is not what you want to experience anywhere, let alone Fiordland. You can literally get washed off the mountain or blown off the mountain, or the lakes rise or waterfalls pop out of nowhere. But we did also have news via satellite that we had this one stellar day of climbing before that forecast, and it was for Bluebird Day, perfect conditions. Yeah, girls, we're gonna climb the Tusk. So we go to bed, and everyone gets ready, and they've packed their bags, and we've got to have this beautiful Bluebird Day. And in the morning we all wake up, and it is so windy that you cannot walk out of your tent. Like, you could not stand in this wind. As Liz put it, she tried to take a pee in the bushes, and she's like, you need to sit in the tussock so that you don't pee all over yourself, because the wind is just, where we were camped, it was this huge cirque, this huge head wall, and the wind would just come in and it just like churned. So yeah, we were in this situation where we'd walked all the way to the Tusk and we've been staring at it, waiting for a good climbing day, and we got this beautiful bluebird day, but it was so windy and we're flying out pretty much the next day. So we had a big discussion, and the cutoff time was 1 o'clock for them to start climbing. So this climb ended up being 600 meters. No one had climbed what they were climbing. It was probably going to be a mixture of vegetation, chossy, bad rock that did break off in parts. And the descent off the back was slightly overhanging, chossy, falling apart, quite a big descent. So the cutoff was 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock came around and the wind had died down just enough that they went, all right, let's go for it. So they started climbing.
An hour late. It was after 2 o'clock that they started a 600-meter climb that no one had ever done before, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. Like, you go to Arapiles and you're like, oh, it's 2 o'clock. Should we start a multi-pitch, you know? They're in the middle of nowhere, super remote place, and Liz and Rosie, they did it. They were absolute legends, and they did it. So this 600-meter climb, they ended up pitching out probably 4 pitches on the whole thing. The rest of it they soloed. Mostly because the rock was so bad that there's no point placing gear, and the rock was falling apart. Parts of it, there was like one section was a grassy, tusky kind of vertical ledge which they could solo. And I think by the time they got to the summit, they were having so much fun soloing that they just finished it. Anyway. So they got to the summit soloing. Their descent was, you know, they'd gotten there just on sort of sunset. Yeah. And their descent did involve, you know, wrapping off some pretty dodgy boulders. You know, they had to like rope up for a traverse, and it was pretty chossy, and they're kind of doing it going into darkness. But it was a legendary effort from them too. And that's what you get with Tassie climbers. Yeah. That's why that team was made of Anna from Fiordland and then 2 Tasmanian climbers that can handle runouts and, you know, all that kind of jazz that Tassie climbing provides you with. Yeah. So, yeah, they did, and they called it Kakapo's Crest. They graded it 16, so the bottom pitches were about a 16. Okay. But, yeah, you know, it wasn't the hardest climb, but it was sketchy in that even if it's a grade 10, whatever, if your hold breaks and you're 500 meters above, you know, the next ledge, it's the same outcome. So they did super well. Yeah. Yeah. And is it on film? Will we get to see it? You'll have to see. Yeah. No, we did. So Simon, we can't have too many stories break. Yeah. No, so but the coolest thing was at that trip, or one of the coolest things, is that Simon Bischoff had taken me on all these adventures, and I'd learnt so much through doing that. And finally, I got to get him to come onto my adventure. So he shot drone for me on that. Yeah. And it was like the perfect thank you present to him. Like, you get to do this now. So it was cool to work together, but the other way around. So what does the future hold for you? I mean, are you going to keep saying yes to everything? Where's that going to take you? Currently I'm still saying yes to everything. I might be, okay, so Nepal might be on the cards. So I'm the Arc'teryx ambassador, one of. There's another ambassador called Dom, who's mountaineer, and he's New Zealander, and he guides places like Denali, Dublin, Everest. And he's another person that I've met in my life who's shown up with an opportunity to go and climb something big. So that is sitting back there in my mind. I may or may not do that. But honestly, I do want to get a festival going. I do want to make sure that women's workshops are happening, climbing workshops. I'm currently training to be a guide out here at Arapiles. I would love to share my love for trad climbing with especially other women. I've been trying to climb with more females lately just because
And I'd love to see, you know, just women come out of the gym and go into trad climbing in places like the Grampians and Arapiles. So it's still a pretty passionate thing for me. Change is definitely happening, but I'd like to be part of it, or at least be part of, you know, making it a quicker...
Accelerating it.
Accelerating it, yeah.
Being a catalyst for that change.
Yeah, if possible. I mean, I just don't want to, you know, look back, you know, in 40 years and be like, oh, you know, there was all this momentum and something could have been done, or we could have tried a bit harder. I think right now is the time to really push women into sport and equality on all sides. I think it will benefit the entire community. It's not about excluding men or saying that men are shit or men are, you know, dominating or whatever. I think it's we're all human, and if we can lift each other, then that's the end game.
That's it, Australia. I'm eager to see what's in store for Olivia in the future and her upcoming film that'll be released on the expedition to the Fiordland in New Zealand. You can follow her story and get updates on her website and socials, which of course I've linked to. If you don't remember it by now, you should, thelayback.com. Thanks to all of you for listening and for the continued feedback on the podcast. The Layback podcast is powered by the Psych, and hearing from listeners always helps keep up the stoke, gets those episodes coming out faster. So, wherever you're headed today, may the stoke be high, may the coffee be strong, and may people stop asking you about whether or not you've seen that film with that guy. You know, that climbs that cliff in that place? You know, the one without the rope. Do you do that? To take us out, here's an excerpt from Winter on the Blade of Mark Savage playing tunes on a tent guy rope to keep everyone amused during the bad weather that they experienced while trying to climb Federation Peak in Tasmania.
It's amazing what can entertain a person. It's amazing.
Doesn't get any better than this.
Fuck, what more do you need?
How good's life?